The whole purpose of Terraria Bedrock is basically to add a whole host of different ores, tools, weapons, enemies, bosses and biomes all from the game Terraria into Minecraft. It basically adds a whole host of different features with the goal of adding the complete set of content into the game, like fighting the Eye of Cthulhu boss, digging for rare different ores and exploring dangerous biomes like the Crimson. Now there's already a whole host of different features in there. For an example, you can already access a huge collection of different swords like the Bone Sword, Gold, Tungsten, and some of the more higher tier swords like the Fiery Greatsword, the Beekeeper or Star Fury for an example. You can also access some of the bows and a whole set of different axes. There's also a lot of different armor sets with some of the more higher tier ones like Corrupted, Meteorite and Hellstone armors being available too, and some of the really impressive throwables like the throwing knives, shurikens and boomerangs being accessible. Even some of the range weapons like muskets and some explosives are available, which can be purchased from the Demolition NPC. You can get a lot of different things in this add-on, and it's really realistic with all the sound sets coming straight from Terraria, which you'll be familiar with from the original game. I think there's also some changes to the actual surface generation itself, because a lot of the different ore sets actually spawn on the surface, a little bit more like Terraria, whereas in Minecraft everything seems to spawn deep down underground. You'll also be able to access some of the potions, which lets you change the player's state in the game, like the gravitation potion, which lets you fly really high up in the sky, and some other potions like the recall one, which lets you teleport straight back to the spawn. You need to be careful with some of the potions though, especially the gravitation one, as if you stray too far up in the sky, you're gonna go really high up and then drop really low down and hit the ground hard like a rock, and most of the time you'll die unless you're lucky enough to hit the ground and land in a lake like I was. As for the trees itself, somehow they've also managed to replicate the actual wood cutting process from Terraria, where if you cut the bottom block of the tree, the whole tree falls down, and it shows all of the item drops and logs and all of the different sprites and graphics when you destroy the wood as it comes crashing down. Now one thing I really do like is the fact that they've also implemented the corruption over here, and as you can see the corruption biome is very similar to how it actually is in Terraria, in the sense that the caves run really deep. Now I did encounter some kind of mob here or boss. I think this was supposed to be the Eater of Worlds, although I really wasn't sure, because the original worm Eater of Worlds boss in Terraria is like a really gigantic long worm, whereas these was just floating arms coming out of the surface. You can also find the Crimson and Corruption altars, although when you destroy them with anything but a hammer, it doesn't hurt you like it does in the game, so I think it still needs a little bit of work. As for the actual dungeons, there are dungeons in Terraria where you can actually face the Skeletron boss, which is one of the more higher end bosses that you fight for some pretty good loot, and also for the ability to access the dungeon. You can talk to the old man, activate the curse, and it will summon Skeletron, which is broken down into multiple mini bosses, which obviously signify the different limbs of the boss, which you have to defeat individually. Of course, if you enter the dungeon without defeating Skeletron, he will get you and you'll be in for a surprise. I think the Humanoid Animals add-on's probably one of the more stranger ones. Basically, it aims to convert all the various kinds of animals into strange animal-shaped humanoids which function in different ways. Basically, it changes all the animals' bodies to make them shaped like humans, and each of them have different interactions and abilities. For an example, the cow basically has a heart like a cow and you can feed it with wheat. There's also the sheep man, which is a sheep with a humanoid body shape, which you can shave down, change its color and feed it. It's kind of weird when all of these mobs are humanoids, because obviously it still functions like a sheep where you can shear it and get a wool from it, but it looks like a human, so it just feels like a really weird process, especially if you're a farmer basically doing your business, collecting all of the materials and wool from this human-like sheep. There's also the zombie pigman, but it converts the pigman itself into a normal pigman like the classic ones from Alpha and the earlier versions, and it replaces the zombified piglin, which is the newer version, with a normal version of the pigman. Basically, there is a version of the pigman which replaces the pig, and then the zombified piglin version, which is basically a normal pigman covered in armor. It's pretty weird. I would say one of my favorite is the Foxy NPC, which is basically a fox mob that can be bred with sweet berries just like the normal fox. box. There's also a brown version of the cow humanoid, which is brown in colour, as well as an appropriate one which matches the one for the mushroom, which you'll most likely find spawning on the Mushroom Islands. The final version of the panda humanoid is probably one of my favourites. I do really like the normal pandas which tend to spawn in the bamboo forests, but for a humanoid this looks pretty cool and the model looks really nice, although of course I do like the normal pandas. You may have seen a little bit before that there is also a wolf man that you can tame, feed and command it to actually hunt for you, and even though it's a humanoid you can still make it sit down and it still wears a collar when it's a pet, which is also all the more weird. Also, when it gets red eyes when it sees some prey to hunt down and kill, it looks pretty aggressive and ferocious, but then after it's killed it, it just has a massive cheesy grin, which is kind of disturbing if you think about it. This motorcycle is an all-terrain motorcycle which is made for combat and transportation, and it's planned to be used on a map which is future planned. Basically 2 players can ride this motorcycle, and it takes its ideas on the model from the Leginia Mars Motorcycle add-on, but it's a completely different model and texture. Basically it's designed to be ridden by a player, but you can also make NPCs ride on it. Since it has 2 seats, the spectacular thing that I found out when I was riding it in a village is the fact that you can actually ride it through the village, and if it collides into a villager NPC, the villager mob can actually ride on the back of it, which just makes it look hilarious. There is also a chest on the back. I'm not entirely sure if you can access it and use it to put loot in or for storage. I didn't really test out this specific feature, but it makes the whole bike model actually look a lot more attractive and cooler. Also, if you drive underwater, I would not recommend this. I think the closest thing you're going to find to the Escape and Run Parasites mod from Java on Bedrock is probably the Terramorph Addon, which is basically an add-on adding creatures called Terramorphs, which dot up and appear around the world. They create hives and they reproduce in large numbers, and they're basically parasitic creatures with a huge number of different types, being accompanied by a queen and a king, which are the most dangerous variants. Trying to survive in the world with all these creatures running rampant is pretty hard. For an example, you have the normal standard parasites, which do have a small amount of health, but they can infect nearly every single animal in the world, which will convert them into an egg and cocoon. It turns them into an egg, which a baby Terramorph will appear out after a while, which will break free from the egg. Now, when the baby Terramorph appears from this cocoon, after 30 seconds it'll turn into a juvenile, which is basically a long brown shaped lizard looking creature. This will take 1 minute to convert into an adult, which can be a worker, a warrior, a tank, a prime or an elite, which are a few different variants which are completely randomized. The elites differ in appearance from the other juvenile appearances. There's so many different variants here, and it's extremely creepy when the parasites are crawling amongst the cocoons and eggs. When a Terramorph bites it, it will poison its target, and workers can replace some blocks with different hive blocks. As they tread on the ground, some of these Terramorphs will poison the ground and replace the blocks with hives, which kind of litter and make the world look a lot more different. The warriors are much stronger versions. They're poisonous when they bite, and they spawn all across the world with a really high level of HP, whereas the primes are what guard the queens, and they're very strong and they can weaken the enemy when they bite them. If you like the brand new AXOLOTLS which have been added, or if generally you just have an AXOLOTL as a pet, this might be a pretty cool add-on to explore. Now, even though it's an add-on, it's not really a mod per se, because it's actually a skin pack which adds some more content. If you want to actually see yourself as an AXOLOTL, function like it and look like it, you can basically have access to all the different AXOLOTL appearances and skins by installing the skin pack, which will allow you to create a custom appearance in the appearance manager and allow you to utilize one of the different 5 colors, which is 2 shades of blue, yellow, orange, a pink color and a brown color. 5 different variants in total. Underwater you'll function and look like an authentic axolotl, and the swimming animations look really nice. It's actually pretty satisfying to swim under the water and fish manually just by punching all the fishes. It's actually a really tranquil and peaceful experience, and the gameplay is totally different. Like we mentioned before with Escape and Run Parasites mod, there are a lot of high quality different mods on Java that Bedrock players literally just can't have access to in any form, with a lot of them being converted or having their own versions for Bedrock. Unfortunately, some of the best mods like Galacticraft in this situation doesn't have a Bedrock counterpart, until now. I'd say Cosmos, which is an open world space add-on, is probably the closest you're going to get to Galacticraft on Java. It allows the player to travel to different planets, and the planets currently available are the Moon and Mars, which are used by upgrading the rocket from the Moon version to the Mars version. The Moon's the first planet you can travel to, which seems to always be the case in these space mods, and it has a lower gravity than the overworld, where you can find space zombies. It's actually pretty funny because if you spawn the space zombies in the normal overworld in creative, they'll actually still have low gravity mode, as you can see in the clip, even though they're not on the Moon. I thought this was a pretty funny oversight, which I don't think the mod creator actually realised. As for Mars, it is a little bit of a different planet, and it just functions completely differently from the Moon and looks a little bit better. There's also a spacesuit, which is essential as a set of armour as you plan to go to space, as it's needed if you want to breathe oxygen. The menu for launching the rocket is a little bit clunky in comparison to Java, but they've done what the best they can with what they've got for Bedrock, and it actually works pretty seamlessly. As for the particles and the animations on the rocket itself, it performs nearly exactly one-to-one with Galacticraft, and it looks really nice. The only difference which I noted was the fact that you can't rotate the rocket or change the direction manually using the controls. As you can see, there's a brand new mob which adds the SNOM to Minecraft, which is basically a creative menu spawnable creature in the nature category, which you can find by spawning him through the egg category of the menu. Now basically this is a little worm ice looking Pokemon that kind of appears like a small marshmallow encased in ice. It's a really slow mob, but it's a pretty cute looking one in appearance, and if you're a monster and kill one of them, you'd probably get a few different interesting drops which can be randomized, anything from ice and snowballs. Adventure Expansion is currently in beta, and it's an add-on that plans to add some more adventure and exploration systems into the game, along with some fun bosses, cool and powerful fresh weaponry, and overall just generally enhances to the current experience. Now, the best feature in my personal opinion is the Goblin Raid, which is clearly an event inspired by the one in Terraria that can be summoned using the Goblin Banner item. This is an item that's pretty easy to craft and obtain, and you can interact with it to start. It basically summons in a very similar fashion to how you initiate a pillager raid, but it's a little bit different, with this raid consisting of goblin warriors, rangers, summoners, grunts, and the main boss, which is the goblin beast, which you can see as a demonstration. I show you just how tanky it is and how long it takes to damage it and kill it. It's also pretty cool the sense that once you've completed the raid itself, you get a nice displayable trophy for the wall. As for the actual dungeons, you may find a few structures around the world, which are basically copies of the structures you'll find in the Battle Towers mod. I'm not sure if they took inspiration from this or just used it as a simple idea, but they're basically exactly the same thing in Java, although these aren't very common in Bedrock add-ons, so it's something fresh for this version of the game. Now, there's very many multiple levels of these because these towers are absolutely gigantic, so you'll expect to explore quite a few different stages, with each level having completely different enemies and a whole ton of spawners on them. Although there's not really much loot on each level, it just seems to be a massive dungeon set of enemies that you have to fight through, which is not exactly the same on the Java edition, where most floors actually have a few chests of loot, which kind of gives it a purpose to explore each floor. Mainly in this situation, you're going to want to go to the top, because this is where you're going to find the boss, which is the golem. Now, the golem itself kind of just sits in the middle of the room, and it looks exactly like the one from the Battle Towers mod, in the sense that it appears like a huge big stone brick structure with a huge big amethyst purple eye in its center. It will stand still and not attack you until you initiate the fight, and as you can see, it has an absolutely huge health bar. But in the sense of the situation, just like what we had with the goblin beast, it does actually take quite a lot of damage and you can down it pretty quickly. I was attacking it using the goblin club item, which is nowhere near as good as some of the endgame swords, and it went down pretty easily. There's also these strange well structures which spawn across the world that you might be lucky enough to find. Now, on the surface they don't really appear to be much, they kind of look like a surface tent or a market hut, but when you actually destroy some of the stone blocks below and you go down underground, it will lead you down a huge big tunnel which drops you into a large labyrinth where you'll see a big dungeon which has a set of different corridors and tunnels which you can get very easily lost in. These tunnels are littered with different mobs, and they're very similar to some of the randomly generated dungeon mods which you can expect to see on Java. For an example, a lot of the different roguelike dungeons behave exactly like this, making this add-on a perfect blend between so many different ones of your favourite mods. And as you can see from this clip, it even takes a lot of its inspiration from some of the features from the Ice and Fire Dragons mod from Java. You can see over here I'm wearing some blue dragon armour which is made out of blue dragon scales, and there's also a blue dragon boss which can spawn, which is basically a reskinned ender dragon. As you can see, it's pretty tough to damage it. There's also the Inferno mob, which is a large fire boss, which is basically just a much tankier version of the Blaze, which you can find in the Nether. This boss does actually do a ton of damage, but it's perfectly balanced. As you can see, I was wearing dragon armor, and I'm not sure if that has any fire resistance, so maybe that lends to the fact why I'm not taking as much damage from the burning attacks. And finally, there is also the set of pirate mobs. Now, the pirates spawn with a pirate captain and the pirate bandit. The bandit is basically the weaker version, which you can find in more abundance and easily defeat, and the captain is the more tanky boss variant, which summons a flock of different parrots and birds that fly above it in the sky. If you were curious about bringing various toys into the game and playing together with them, then this add-on might be the interesting choice for you, as it adds a bonus of 12 different fun toys to collect and use. Some of them are display blocks and vanity items, whereas some of them are actually functional. For an example, there's a range of toy guns and rifles which are single shot or double shot, which you'll need a range of different ammunition to use, and they don't really tend to do really much damage to any of the mobs in game because they just tend to be toy bullets which are just for show. In first person mode, the toy gun models appear like Nerf weapons that shoot rubber darts in real life, and in third person they look pretty cool to hold too. You can even put them on display stands to kind of get an idea of how they will look like when posed, or you can go into the player view to see what they look like too. There's a few different rifles which are modelled after real world counterparts which appear like Nerf weapons, and each of them have different fire modes. There's also toy masks, some different new mobs like toy traders, and a lot of cool nifty little features like targets. One of the most popular Java mods of all time, which has gained a huge amount of recognition in the last year or more, is the Origins mod. Now, this is so popular that people have actually decided to port this to Bedrock and make a Bedrock version, and basically I'm going to give you a general description of the purpose of this mod. It basically adds something called Origins, which is a unique way to play the game. Basically, each Origin possesses unique passives and active traits and ability skills that affect the vanilla gameplay. There's up to 9 different Origins or more to choose from, or you can pick the ordinary human origin, which just functions like normal Steve and doesn't really change the game. Once you load into any brand new world, when running this add-on alongside it, it'll greet you with a selection screen which lets you cycle through all the different origins, showing the abilities, bonuses and negatives to them, and it lets you choose which one you want, along with a description of what it is and a little bit of lore and backstory. There's a lot of different special traits, and you need to be careful in terms of the labels of them because some of them give advantages and disadvantages. For an example, plus traits are advantages, minus traits are disadvantages, and the ones labelled as equals are traits that can be either good or bad. There's also gameplay impacts, with each origin having 1 to 3 different dots by their name, which shows the gameplay impact, which is based upon the usual vanilla gameplay without add-ons. Hovering over this or clicking on it will display the origin's gameplay impact. If you want to play something more native to the original game, it's recommended to go with the lowest impact, which shows as 1 circle, or if you want to play something completely different, the 3 circles showing high gameplay impact will completely change the gameplay experience. There's also trait cooldowns, so when you play as an origin there will be a bar above your normal hunger bar which shows when the trait is next usable and how long it will be unusable for. You need to pay attention to these cooldowns and plan ahead when you utilize them. Currently there's the human, avian, arachnid, elytrian, shulk, feline, Enderian, Merling, Blazeborn and Phantom Origins, with a lot more to be added in the current and future updates. This changes how the NPC interaction screen is being displayed, and if you use it in your world, you can't be able to properly use and customize any NPCs anymore, so you need to be careful and take this into account. This is possibly one of the coolest add-ons for Bedrock right now, and anyone who's coming from Java will really appreciate this. I'm just going to show some more footage of all the descriptions and the bonuses and weaknesses of each origin for anyone who's interested in exploring what they are.